What we're going to talk about today is address the basic relationships that people have with brands, and in particularly we're going to question the way in which people engage with the brands. So that happened quite a long while after I decided to respond to this idea of presenting here. And as this was going on, there was a lot of thoughts that occurred on this whole idea of brands that emerged into this 4 days of madness that overtook not just London, for that matter, and the way in which the whole thing occurs. All this is a political event which I don't really want to go into. What I do want to go into is what happens afterwards, because what afterwards is a certain variety of articles appeared, particularly that one, which is about a week after the looting took place in Campaign, which is an industry magazine, which headlines read, "Why brands are to blame for the riots." And that struck me as quite an extraordinary statement to make, particularly in Campaign. Why brands are to blame for this riot? The more you think about this, the more this becomes quite an extraordinary statement because of the implication that is within that sentence. It basically states that brands do have this ability to bias. They have this ability to create desire for things that people basically don't need, let alone want. Clearly, this is very irresponsible behavior. Those headlines that are at the bottom ran over about a month to follow. These attacks on brands have to pay the price, and all sorts of debate and discussion about the need to be more responsible, i.e. brands have the ability to be irresponsible, and brands are irresponsible. Therefore, brands are bad. Brands are bad. I'm bad. That's what I do every day. Half of you, by the looks of things as well. I had to ask myself, will I fall asleep tonight? I mean, this is really bad. I was really getting into this trouble of these moral criteria that I need to deliver all of a sudden. So, first of all, yes, I can sleep at night very well. I thought that's where we start. We need to start by looking back and trying to work out what's going on here. What is this thing called a brand? The branding begins at about 1400. The meaning of the word is fire, flame, a firebrand, piece of burning wood, a torch. At about 1550s, the usage began to be in the sort that we recognize today. It's where the first cows were being branded by the hot iron as a sign of belonging. If you have the sign on you, you belong. And 300 years later, it becomes this particular make of goods, which is still the same idea. It's still the idea that things which are marked by this sign belong to this movement, to this idea that tells you how to think about it. The brand name as such is only started to be used in 1922. So as I searched for this and tried to find what's the latest definition of a brand, I ended up with Haggerty. And he talks about a corner of someone's mind. It's not a new thought. For the last few years, we understand brands as something that lives in the consumer's mind, in the consumer's head. It creates this way of relating to those things. So something which is branded, I now think about it in a slightly different way because it's branded as opposed to if it wouldn't have been branded. So it's this thing in my head through which I see, through which I perceive, and through which I can remember what that particular thing is. There's another sentence that Haggerty said in the book. It's very difficult buying something you cannot remember. We moved it on a little bit, and we're kind of beginning to think of a brand as a memory. A brand is a memory in our minds. And what is really weird is how do we get from this to that? It's a bizarre jump that needs understanding. What really worries me in that is what the idea behind the idea actually suggests here. And the idea primarily is that brands here are bad, as we said earlier. And the reason the brands are bad is because they have this ability to create desire for people for things they don't need or want. And I think if anybody is into brands and into branding and design or advertising, this should be a really worrying thought, because if that is the case, we should all pack and go home. And I don't think it's the case quite categorically. It tells us to stop aspiring. It tells us that we just shouldn't aspire for anything. That branding and marketing is this thing that damages society. That it is driven by this notion that each one of us would be better off if we simply stop aspiring. So the Mona Lisa. So the reason I put the Mona Lisa here is because I'm going to try and look through the Mona Lisa to give us this tool of psychological viewing to understand that relationship from a different angle. I'm going to look at this from an art history perspective and the psychology of art. And the first things to note about this painting, as Professor van der Berg in his book talks about, is that this is the first painting to have a landscape painted as a landscape behind it. So we are talking about 1503. There is no relationship between her and the landscape behind her. And it's a weird landscape. It's got two layers in it. There's a first level, which is almost brownish in color and human, and there's another layer behind it, which is almost inhuman. And it's not just a perspective, it's also an aerial perspective. Just as reference, before that, this is a painting without perspective, where everything is looking at you at the same space, at the same level, at the same speed. There's no primary or secondary. And if you like this kind of paintings, you're invited to join into the painting, because it's all facing you at the same space. I'm going back to the Mona Lisa. So if you see that line that's drawn around her, that line over there, and you can see this is the balcony she's sitting on both sides. And this particular line, if you go into the Louvre site and you go Mona Lisa, you'll discover that that's the way in which they're presenting it, and trying to go through the explanation of the way in which the detachment takes place between her and the world behind her. Rainer Maria Rilke, if you're not aware of, is a poet. And in his book, he writes about this landscape as a landscape which is almost hostile in its indifference, and creates this separation between her and the world. Or other words, she's turning away from the world, and all we can see is her smile. So this particular analysis is from Romanician, as I said earlier. So the smile for him dominates this painting, and we all know that the smile dominates the painting. It's a strange smile, what he will call an inner smile. And the way he analyzes the inner smile is, as she turns away from the world, the smile invites us to gaze inside. And this is why Walter Becker talked about this as a symbol for the modern world, a symbol for the psychological modern world, I should say, a world where we are invited to focus on ourselves as independent me, and therefore we become excluded, alienated, with a sense of nowhere else to turn. And I think this is a slightly better way of looking at what's going on with the riots take place, where all of a sudden we are faced with this world where people are alienated, they are excluded, they've got nowhere else to turn, they're separated from the world, and they go internally in order to do anything at all that allows them to find a place within this world. And in this case, what's happening is the brands becoming symptoms for the problem, but they're not the causes for the problem, and I think that is where the confusion takes place. Brands are being blamed for our inability as society to engage with the world. Perhaps people are turning away from cultural community ideas, and they focus away from their immediate needs on their needs. People go, I mean, some of the striking things on those riots is people were looting the shop next door. That they went in the morning and bought something for £1. So there is a collapse of relationship with the world that takes place. And it is when this engagement with the world doesn't take place that the brands become symptoms for this problem. And as I said, they're definitely not the cause. But we don't want to get stuck into the politics of this. But we have to get stuck into the morality of this, as we said earlier. So I'm going to quote from 50 years ago, I think, when a certain gentleman who was very famous in his field, advertising in this case, was challenged on this particular subject matter. So this is not a new subject matter, okay? This is going on for a long time. So he was challenged on occasion like this about the morality of this that we do, of the morality of brands, the morality of advertising, of branding. And he asked, does what we do make people want to buy products they do not need? And if you don't think that people need deodorants, you are at liberty to criticize us for having persuaded most of the population to use them. And if you disapprove of luxury goods, creature comforts, holiday travel, you are also at right to blame us for encouraging such wickedness. And if you dislike affluent society, you are at right to blame us for inciting the masses to pursue it. And if you're this kind of a Puritan, I cannot reason with you. So Puritans have been going on for years about the problem with brands, or the desire that is associated and the aspirational thoughts that go with it. So this is going on for 500 years. The desire for material goods is bad. The desire for this aspirational for earthly pleasures is terrible. It leads us away from being proper human beings. And we can't be a responsible citizen if that's the way we aspire, desire, or behave. And the logic of that goes that if the desire arises from the brand, then I'm okay. I haven't done anything wrong. I've just been, for a second, not on my guard. But it's the brand that's bad. So let's burn brands. This is the bonfire of the vanities. 7th February 1497 in Florence. Savonarola goes out and organizes this particular bonfire. Everything is burnt. Mirrors, cosmetics, dresses, musical instruments, art. Botticelli himself takes numerous amounts of his own art and paintings and put them to the fire. Paintings we do not know what they look like, and we will never know what they look like. Some obviously incredible historical stuff, because he's convinced at that point that what he's doing is bad. Books of incredible value being collected in people's house. Any Greek book, every Plato, everything goes to the square and gets burnt. He doesn't stop there. 53 years later in Geneva, that's of course Calvin himself, imposes a strict moral code in Geneva. That particular moral code lasted for over 200 years until Jean-Jacques Rousseau turned up in Geneva and freed the city, so to speak. 200 years of no music, no alcohol, no perfume, no laces, no extravagant, no mirrors. It's quite extravagant where the first police state that we know of existed for 200 years. Where people's thoughts were monitored, where people's conversations were reported. They did not quite have cameras in the streets then. Not quite. It's the mirrors business that really bugs me. So why is everybody burning mirrors? What's wrong with mirrors? What happens when we look at the mirror? What happens when this woman looks at the mirror? She, first of all, sees this reflection of herself. So what is this reflection? Is this unimportant, immaterial, non-significant, simple reflection of what she is? We already know it isn't because it's 3D and it's reversed, but that's just technical. So what is going on when I look at that reflection? Well, when you look at that reflection, there's also a story beginning to develop between you and the reflection. If for a second, as you look at this, you begin to think to yourself, I'm about to go out with my boyfriend, soon to become my husband, and I'm going to have a great night out, and don't I look good in this dress? Sometime, or maybe all the time, you begin to look just slightly that much better. Now, I reflected better in a very politically incorrect way, because the politically incorrect way tends to be more accurate than politically correct way. And I think in any case, that's the way the cosmetic industry taught us to think about everything. So it's slightly thinner to reflect that she's slightly better looking there. So I apologize for that. So what happens is that she's seeing herself through a story that gets on in her head. So that's a weird one, okay? Because you look at yourself through the mirror, and that reflection changes as the story begins to develop in your head. And if the story begins to change, for example, all of a sudden you drift away and you begin to think about maybe some other of your girlfriends who are particularly young and particularly beautiful, somehow, does my bum look bigger this? No, darling. And that is inevitable. This happens every time, because the way this, as soon as the story takes place, as soon as something interferes between me and what I look at, what I've seen has changed. Okay, this is obviously critical to our story here as the metaphor. This is not the end of it, of course, because the story can continue. The story can continue as she looks at this mirror, and all of a sudden, she goes, oh my God, what will he say? Is my bumping in this? For that instant, she becomes him. She actually sees the story from somebody else's perspective. That image can change her. So there's a relationship, a complex relationship of things flicking and things changing. And we move away from the mirror as this little metaphor for brands. I just want to look at this particular painting. So this painting is an odd one because it's a 1906 painting. It's a Fauvist called Raoul Duffy. And he paints out of perspective. This little movement that lasted for about a couple of years, out of which eventually we are getting Picasso and Cubism and all that happens after that, i.e. non-realistic painting. But here the beginning of a movement away from perspective drawing into going back to presenting stuff in a flat manner, i.e. no perspective. Other words, I'm invited to join what I'm seeing rather than to look at it from a distance. So this is, if you like, the opposite from the Mona Lisa. The way in which it presented affects the way I look at it. It affects what I think I'm looking at. In reverse, it affects me completely. So there is a relationship between what I see, because what I see is managed by the way in which it was presented. So the communication between us and what we're seeing it continuously change and affects what I see and what it is that I'm looking at. So brands are not black and white. There is a dynamic between us and the brands that continuously drive and feed each other. So it's a relationship. It's a way a brand presents itself matters. So I'm not talking about the way the brand does advertising and try to get me to think in a particular way about it. How it looks matters. It changes us and what we see, and it relates to our aspirations and our desires. And what we desire is complicated. What is desire? Why do we desire? Where do we desire? What's going on here? Etymologically, this is quite striking. The word itself comes from a French phrase, the cidre, which means from the stars. Await what the stars will bring. Desire means awaiting for what the star. When I say meaning, obviously means etymologically, not dictionary. Awaiting what the stars will bring. Other words, the desire is an integral part of the universe with which we find ourselves. It's not something that's generated from the inside. It's integral to our condition, and it's not something that we simply turn on and off. It's what makes us human. Here's a little controversial painting, Hieronymus Busch, The Garden of Earthly Delights. So this is also same period. He is painting desire. He's painting earthly desire. He's following in the footsteps of Dante. He's looking at what Dante is writing, and he's developing this thought. The painting is a lot more complex than just that part of it that does the Garden of Earthly Delights. He does other parts as well. I'm not going to go into that, but in Dante, all desire is good. All desire is good. Blake will say all desire is good. Desire is like a big net that can God throw into the world that catches what it catches. As in this painting, desire with intensity to the fullness of every moment of experience, whatever that might be. And that's an analysis by Sardello of that particular painting. Sex, desires, aspirations, things that happened and drive and cause things to happen is a serious matter. Romanishan writes about desire making us human. We look out to the stars. We are facing the world. We are not like the Mona Lisa. We're not looking coldly away from. We are looking into it and looking up into it because we are aspiring with it. And then we feel a displacement that needs fulfilling. So the world, when we look at it in that way, creates a displacement. The world creates the needs. The world creates this drive that we need to fulfill. And it's driven by a memory. And of course, memories are very dodgy things. Sometimes they never were. And that's how we engage with the world. So when my wife looks at that window in Selfridges with all those shoes, it's not because all the rest of her shoes have now got holes in them. But there is some sort of a displacement. There's some sort of a need that arises from the shoe that creates this memory for the event that this shoe will fit. You're looking at the shoe creates a displacement. The shoe creates a gap that you have to fill. And that gap that you have to fill is a memory. But that memory is not a historical memory, it's a memory of something that might happen, might not happen, might never happen, or will not exist. But it's a memory that needs fulfilling, and that's where the desire comes from, and that's the bit that I need to fill. I've got to move into that space and do something about it. It's nothing to do with the need for shoes. The need is to engage with the world. The need is for the brand to offer me a way of doing something else in the world, engaging with the world, making the world more sensible to me. As I'm moving into the world of products and brands, engagement is the biggest word in our world of marketing and branding, and everybody wants engagement with the consumers and engagement with the brands, and we have to look at that quite closely for a second. Products, brands, they sit in the world. What do we need to engage with? At what point does this engagement takes place? So, consumers do not need to engage with products. They buy products. You don't engage with a piece of shoe, you wear it. So this is controversial, I'm fully aware. With this age of Facebook needs to engage with people. I do not think that people want to engage with brands. What brands enable us to do is to better engage with the world. It's the world that I want to engage with. They form part of our lives, and through them we can engage with the world in a better way. The desire is not to simply engage with a product or a brand or the human desire is bigger than that. It's there to engage with the world, and what brands offer is one way, there are other ways obviously, is one way that allow people to do so. What the brand needs in order to do so is to have a clear role. Nokia is a brand. It's a very famous brand. It was the most dominant brand in selling telephones for quite a long time. But as a brand, that's all that it managed ever to do, which is to sell me telephones. That brand has got no role apart from selling me telephones. I have never seen 3,000 people standing in the street queuing to get into a Nokia shop. I have seen 3,000 people standing outside an Apple shop everywhere in the world trying to buy iPhone 4. They already got iPhone 3. It's already not working. But that brand allows me to do what I need to do better in the world, and I don't even think it's factually true, but that's what I think about it. So that's the one ad I thought I'll show. It's about 30 years old. I don't know how old this is. I just think it's phenomenal, okay? Because it doesn't say anything about economies, doesn't say anything about the product, doesn't say anything about the brand. It just tells you that here's a brand that if you're going to go anywhere in the world, you need to start using. It's there about letting you join the world. And there are about 200 of those. All of them doing the same thing. This is a brand about the world, not about itself. So drilling all the way down to packaging first. So the difference is simple. This is a biscuit bar, and that's all that it is, a chocolate biscuit bar. And you buy 7 of them, and you take them to school, and you eat them at lunch. Whereas the new one allows kids to engage better in the world, because their world is not about eating chocolate bars. Their world is about the world they live in, about peer group, about not being laughed at when they take out the wrong chocolate bar out, so something that gives them some sort of credibility, that allows them to be happy for an instant about something which matters very little. And all of a sudden, I'm in their world and playing to their world and giving them a way of engaging in their world in a slightly different way. This is about taking, so this just happened last week, and this is about taking a brand that everybody knows and giving it a role back into its origins, back into where the brand comes from, linking it back to the pizziolas who do the pizza. So the brands come from a place which is real, which I can understand because I got the stripes leaking to the t-shirts, which everybody knows what they are, and all of a sudden the brand becomes not just a word on the restaurant, but a thing that can carry a value that allows me to understand what pizzas are all about in my world. So what I'm saying is that brands matter. Brand makes things matter, because brands can reflect on experience, and at their best, they give us a way to make sense of the things around us. So they take the products and they make them matter because they relate them to our worlds. So I think quite categorically, I suggest to you that brands do not buy us at no point whatsoever. The brands are memories. They're in our heads. Brands live in our heads. We all know that. They are, what we don't know, they are memories. There are memories in our minds, and those memories can be fake. Most memories are fake. And it's through those memories that the brand begins to get a hold and have a meaning through which we can begin to engage with the world. They create this frame with which we reflect on what we think is reality. They become this mirror which frames our view and shapes our engagement with the worlds of things. And I just want to end with a short poem. This is from Wallace Stevens, The Man with the Blue Guitar. The man bent over his guitar, a shearsman of sorts. The day was green. They said, "You have a blue guitar. You do not play things as they are." And the man replied, "Things as they are changed upon the blue guitar." Thank you.